My wife asked to dance a song at the couple's ball with another man, and I let her. Maybe because I trusted too much, or because I was naive enough to think that the love we had built over the years was stronger than an impulse. In that brightly lit hall, with satin-covered tables, glasses raised in toasts, and fake smiles scattered like glitter in the air, I saw her smile differently. It was a kind of smile that had once been mine, but that night, before my very eyes, it was given to another. I still had my wedding ring on when she rested her head on his shoulder. The music was slow, one of those that touches the soul, and the only thing I could hear, besides the melody muffled by the distance, was the sound of my own heart being crushed by the weight of the reality I pretended not to see. She turned to him. He held her face in his hands. And they kissed. Long shamelessly. In front of me. The room stopped. The couple ceased walking, as if time had stood still. I could have made a scene, I could have yelled, pushed, thrown a chair in the air, or smashed a wine bottle against the wall. But I just went over to them. And what I said even made the waiters freeze with their trays in their hands. Don't bother trying to hide it, it's over for me. Then I left. Without looking back. Not because I was strong, but because if I had looked I would have collapsed right there. What they didn't know, and perhaps never will, is that I died a little that night. Not because of the kiss itself. But because I knew she hadn't been kissed. She chose to kiss. And she came back, days later. With red eyes, smeared makeup, and rehearsed words. It was a mistake. I didn't know what I was doing, she repeated, as if that were a shield against her conscience. But the problem wasn't that she didn't know what she was doing. The problem was that she knew exactly what she was doing. She wasn't drunk. It wasn't a fraction of a second. It wasn't an impulse. It was a decision. And the decision destroyed what we had. I didn't yell at her. I didn't slam doors. I just sat in silence and let her say everything. Because sometimes silence screams louder than any words. When she finished, she looked at me as if she expected me to say everything was all right. As if an excuse would be enough to fix a mirror that was already shattered. And I just asked, would you have the courage to do this if I wasn't looking? She didn't answer. I distanced myself. Not out of pride, but because self-respect was all I had left. The love I felt for her. It was still there. But too wounded to breathe. Days turned into weeks. Weeks turned into months. And during all that time, she sent messages, wrote letters, showed up unannounced. Always with the same look, of guilt. But also of loss. Because she thought she was trading a worn-out love for a living desire. And she discovered too late that desires fade. And loves, those take time, but when they're gone, they never return with the same color. I watched her silently crumble on her own. I saw her gaze lose its firmness, her automatic smiles disappear. I saw her vanity vanish little by little, as if her soul were undressing from within. And I saw him, the other one, leaving. He didn't make a scene. He simply vanished. In the same way he appeared. Like a wind that moves the curtain for a moment and then disappears, leaving only silence in its place. She tried to hold on to him. And he, coldly, said, "You were good to me, in that moment. But we are nothing more than that." She called me that same night. Crying. Desperate. She said she now knew what she had done. That she had lost the man of her life. That she had thrown away years of care for a kiss. And that she wanted to come back. That she would do anything. That she didn't care how long it took. That she would wait. And maybe, if it were someone else, I would have come back. But something inside me no longer beat in the same rhythm. She broke something that can't be mended with promises. I heard everything. And I said, "You lost me the moment you chose to feel for someone else what was only ours." That's when I met someone. On an ordinary night, without warning, without any expectations. A casual conversation that turned into complicity. A light smile that became a refuge. She didn't know what I had been through. But she respected my every silence, like someone who understands that scars don't need to be displayed to hurt. And little by little, without asking for anything, she gave me back things I didn't even know had been taken away. Peace. Simple laughter. The desire to try again. And, above all, respect. Respect before any promise. While I silently rebuilt myself, on the other side, the woman who swore to love me discovered that sometimes the greatest punishment is not losing the other person, it's realizing that the other person has already lost you completely. And when she tried to win me back, when she tried to repeat that kiss with the man who made her lose me, he recoiled. He took 2 steps back. And said, "It was just a moment. I don't want anything to do with you." Her silence after that echoed louder than any argument. She not only lost the love of her life. She also lost the illusion that led her to betray him. And today, when we meet by chance, she still has that look. A look that carries more questions than words. And me? I carry the serenity of someone who no longer needs to prove anything. She asked for forgiveness. I gave it. Not because she deserved it. But because I deserved to be free. I forgave. But I moved on. And I didn't look back. What she doesn't know, is that I accidentally discovered something that could change everything. Something that would explain the real reason for that kiss. But when I found out, it was too late. And that changes the whole story. Welcome to the channel. Here, we never romanticize or condone any kind of betrayal. The stories you'll hear are fictional, but the pain, consequences, and regrets they portray are as real as life itself. The goal is clear, to show how a single wrong choice can destroy everything that was once true. Get ready. What you're about to hear is an intense story, marked by love, loss, and an ending you'll never forget. John and Emily seemed, to everyone, like the perfect couple. They had been together for almost 7 years, 4 of them officially married. Their ceremony, held on a late autumn afternoon, was still remembered by some friends as one of the most moving they had ever witnessed. Not for its luxury, but for the intensity of the look they exchanged as they said their vows. They both came from different backgrounds, with distinct experiences, and for that very reason they learned to balance each other. Emily was a high school literature teacher, passionate about words, sensitive, observant, and quick to laugh, with an almost shy sweetness. John, on the other hand, was quieter, more analytical, someone who always put his feet on the ground before his heart, but who, with her, learned every day to allow himself to feel more. He worked as a financial analyst, with a structured routine and a meticulously planned life, until Emily arrived and disrupted his world with hidden notes, impromptu coffee breaks, and music playing around the house on Sundays. They lived in a modest house in a quiet neighborhood. Nothing too big, but with enough space for the plants she insisted on caring for, even without much talent for it, and for the books that took up more space than the furniture. To those who saw them, they were partners. Emily liked to cook listening to old music, and John liked to observe her from afar, with a glass of wine in his hand, in silence, as if he were a spectator in a film of which he himself was a part. They had their differences, of course. Emily let herself be carried away by emotion, cried watching Christmas commercials, and sometimes bought things she didn't need just because she thought they were pretty. John preferred stability, hated surprises, and believed that feelings should be accompanied by balance. Still, they worked. Because there was care. Because there was dialogue. And, above all, because there was love, that love that wasn't explosive, but that was built in everyday life, in the way he carried the heavy shopping bags without her asking, or in the way she waited for him to fall asleep to gently stroke his hair. They had their difficult moments, like any couple. One particularly memorable one was when John suddenly lost his mother. Emily was his anchor for weeks, sleeping with him on the sofa when he refused to go to his room, silently preparing soup, and simply being there, not saying much, but present. He didn't forget that. Whenever he looked at her after that period, it was with the silent gratitude of someone who knew he had been supported during his worst days. On the other hand, when Emily went through an anxiety crisis a few years earlier, caused by career frustrations and feelings of inadequacy, it was he who held her hand in the middle of the night, saying that it was okay not to be okay. John wasn't one for words, but when he spoke, the words came out precise, firm, as if they knew where they were being placed. Things between them seemed stable, but something was amiss, a silence that began to grow slowly, imperceptible at first, like a light breeze that no one notices until it becomes a storm. John, increasingly immersed in his routine of spreadsheets, deadlines, and meetings, began to arrive home later, to speak less. Emily, in turn, delved deeper into books, students, and the friendships she maintained outside of her marriage. They still loved each other, but something in the frequency between them began to change. Kisses became more automatic. Conversations, less profound. They slept side by side, but their thoughts no longer touched as before. She noticed, in the small details, this growing distance. The way he listened distractedly when she talked about a new book she had read. The way he, once so attentive to her nephew's birthdays, now forgot. He also perceived the changes. Her phone was left face down more often, the laughter for messages that no longer involved the two of them, the glances that lasted too long when they were in restaurants with friends. Nothing glaring. Nothing definitive. Just noise. Echoes of what, one day, was fullness. They tried to salvage it. They tried to have dinners together again. They planned a weekend getaway, like in the old days. They even planned a trip for the following summer. But there was a strange effort in all of it, as if they were trying to rebuild a bridge without knowing exactly where it had broken. Still, they continued. Because giving up didn't seem like an option. And because, somewhere, they still believed it was possible to rediscover what had brought them together. It was during this time that the invitation to the couple's ball came about. A charity event organized by mutual friends. A formal ball, with elegant attire, live music, and a full dinner. A type of occasion they hadn't attended in a long time, but which, somehow, rekindled a hope. Emily was excited. She went with a friend to choose a dress. She asked John several times if he preferred her to wear something blue or something lighter. He, distracted, replied that anything would look beautiful on her. It wasn't a lie. She still charmed him. But he no longer knew how to say it aloud. On the night of the event, she was stunning. The kind of beauty that didn't need much, just presence. John watched her for a few seconds before leaving the house, and something inside him wanted to say that she was, still, the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. But he didn't say it. He just adjusted his tie, held her purse, and locked the door. In the car, the silence was comfortable. Once in the hall, amidst toasts and laughter, they mingled with familiar couples, exchanged comments, complimented the decorations, and danced 2 songs together. She seemed light, laughing more than usual. He, on the other hand, felt a strange pang, a mixture of pride at being with her and fear of no longer knowing if he knew her as well as before. Throughout the evening, she stepped away for a few minutes, saying she was going to greet a friend. He stood there, observing the glasses in people's hands, the clinking of silverware on plates, the couples twirling on the dance floor. When she returned, she was smiling, chatting with someone nearby. John vaguely recognized the face, perhaps from a past party, or a friend of hers. Nothing special. The man approached and, in a polite gesture, asked permission to dance with Emily. John hesitated for a second, but consented. And he stood there, watching. Unaware that this seemingly harmless moment was the exact point where everything would begin to change. There was no pain yet. There was no hurt yet. Just a discomfort, like a cloud covering the sky on a beautiful day. John didn't know why he felt that tightness in his chest. Maybe because, even without knowing it, I already sensed what was to come. Maybe because, at some deep level, he knew that true love doesn't end in shouting, but in silence. And that sometimes, what destroys a couple isn't hatred. It's absence. That night, when they got home, he tried to start a conversation. He asked if she had enjoyed the event. She replied that she had, that it had been a long time since she had felt so good, so alive. He smiled, a slight smile, but inside he carried a doubt, since when had she felt so alive with him? Emily didn't notice. Or she pretended not to notice. She went to take a shower, left her dress hanging on the bedroom door, and fell asleep before him. John stayed awake for a while, lying beside her, listening to the calm breathing that had previously soothed him. And there, in the dark, he understood that there was something they needed to talk about. But not that night. Not yet. Maybe the next morning. What he didn't know was that some stories, when they take too long to be told, end up being told by others. And sometimes, when the truth comes out, it doesn't come to fix things. It comes to break them completely. That night in the hall never left John's memory. Not because anything was said, but precisely because, there, everything that needed to be understood was delivered in silence, in the knowing look between two bodies that were no longer strangers. He clearly remembered the exchange of smiles, the light touch of their hands, the coordinated rhythm between her steps and his, the pause before the kiss, the hesitation that didn't exist. Emily wasn't pulled. She wasn't surprised. She simply yielded. And in that yielding, she destroyed the world they had built together. The moment John approached them was dry, but precise. There was no scream. Only the phrase spoken in a low voice and with clear pain, "Don't bother trying to hide it, it's over for me." After that, he left. And he didn't look back. Not then, nor in the following days. Emily called several times the next day. John didn't answer. In the days that followed, she wrote long, desperate messages. She said it meant nothing, that it had been an impulse, that she was confused, that she regretted it the very second. That what she felt for John was still real. But he, in silence, stared at the words on the screen as if they were in another language. Part of him wanted to understand. Part of him wanted to confront, to shout, to demand an explanation that made sense. But most of her was tired. Tired of searching for logic where there was only choice. And she chose. He knew it. A few weeks later, Emily appeared at the door of the house where they still shared bills, shared furniture, too many memories to easily unravel. She was dejected. Sunken eyes, hair hastily tied back, simple clothes. John opened the door with an inner weariness. She entered silently, and they both sat on the sofa as they had done so many times before. But now there was an abyss between them. She began to speak, between tears and pauses. She said she had felt invisible in recent months, that she didn't know how it had happened, that everything had been too fast. She said that the other man, Mark, was just someone who made her feel alive for a few moments, but that she realized, too late, that it was nothing more than a reflection. He listened to her. Calmly. Without interrupting. When she finished, he simply said that he needed time, that he didn't know what he felt, that perhaps he wouldn't even be able to feel anything for a while. And she, with sincere tears, said that she would wait for him. Months passed, and John plunged into a painful process of rebuilding. Nothing in his routine was the same anymore. Emily's absence wasn't just physical, it left echoes. The cups in the kitchen, the perfume forgotten on a blouse, the shared playlist in the car. But there was also a silent freedom. A kind of peace that didn't come from outside, but from within. Little by little, he went back to doing simple things. Spending time alone. Reading. Walking outdoors. Meeting other people. And it was in this rediscovery that he met someone. Someone who didn't ask too many questions, didn't pressure him, just was there, present, constant, simple. Someone who listened to him with a kind of genuine interest, who laughed at the subtlest things he said, who knew when he wanted to talk and when he just needed silence. It was on a rainy afternoon, sitting in a cafe, that John saw Emily for the first time since the incident. She entered with timid steps, without makeup, but with the same look he knew. She sat at the next table, and the two exchanged restrained greetings. She seemed surprised to see him there. Even more so to see him with another woman. There was no conversation. Just a nod. But at that moment, John realized something: Emily was still stuck in the past. And he, for the first time in a long time, was no longer. Days later, she appeared again. Alone. She knocked on the door, unannounced. John, reluctantly, let her in. She began to speak rapidly, as if afraid of being interrupted. She said she had tried to move on, that Mark wanted nothing to do with her. She said she felt lost. That now she understood everything she had lost. And that, if he still had a place for her in his life, she was willing to rebuild, even if it took time. But John was silent, and that frightened her. She asked if he still felt anything for her. He, with a serene look, replied that perhaps he missed what they had been, but not her now. That what had broken was not just trust, but something deeper, admiration. She cried. She said she understood, but that she needed to try. And then, in a last desperate gesture, she tried to kiss him. She moved closer, touched his face with her hands, looked into his eyes as she had done before. For a second, he closed his eyes. But it wasn't from emotion. It was from the pain of seeing someone sinking into a mistake that could no longer be erased. She brought her lips close to his. And then, he recoiled. He stood up, took 2 steps back, took a deep breath and said, "Do you know what hurts me the most? It wasn't the kiss, it wasn't the betrayal. It was you choosing to feel for someone else something that was once only ours. And now, trying to repeat that with me, as if nothing happened. I am not a reminder of what you lost. I am someone who survived this. And I don't want to be touched by guilt." Emily stood there, paralyzed, not knowing where to put her hands, how to react. And then, in an attempt to justify what could no longer be justified, she confessed something she had kept silent until then. She said that Mark had not only distanced himself, but had rejected her in the coldest way possible. She recounted that, weeks after the ball, when she tried to find him again, he ignored her. That when she finally managed to find him at an event, she tried to kiss him, a kiss that, at that moment, she believed could rekindle what they had experienced. But he recoiled, as John had just done, and said in no uncertain terms, "It was just one night, Emily. I don't want anything more to do with you." That phrase echoed in John's mind like a sentence. Because, at that moment, he understood the true weight of her regret. She wasn't just sorry for losing him. She was desperate for having been discarded by the same man for whom she risked everything. And worse, trying to come back not out of love, but to avoid being alone. The silence between them lasted for long seconds. Emily stood there crying, her face in her hands, and John felt a mixture of sadness and compassion. Not exactly for her, but for the story they had let die. For everything that had been and would never be again. He approached gently and touched her shoulder. "I forgive you," she said in a calm but firm voice. "But not because you asked. It's because I need to move on. And so do you." She tried to hold his hand, but he gently pushed it away. There was no anger in his gesture. Just an end. A definitive end, like the period after the last word of a book that has been read and reread to exhaustion. Emily left the house with trembling steps, as if her own conscience weighed more than her body. Outside, the night was cold. John watched her through the window for a few moments. Not with pain, but with acceptance. The past had, finally, lost its power to hurt him. On the living room sofa, a message flashed on his cell phone. It was from the new woman in his life. A simple, "I arrived safely, and you," that made more sense than all the speeches he had heard in recent months. And at that moment, John understood, clearly, that true love is not made of grand promises, but of presence. Of respect. And of daily choices. He responded with a smile, stood up, and went to the hallway mirror. He looked at himself. There was no more bitterness in his reflection. Just someone who, after being broken, had learned to rebuild himself with stronger pieces. And with that, the story Emily had tried to save that day no longer belonged to her. It belonged to him. And it was only just beginning. In the months following John and Emily's last encounter, their lives took paths that no longer intersected. A definitive silence hung between them, not the kind that waits to be filled with new words, but the kind of silence that simply confirms that everything that needed to be said had already been said. John no longer sought to understand the whys, nor did he mentally replay the details of everything that had happened. That belonged to a closed chapter, and his energy was now focused on a new cycle that was gradually taking shape, gaining lightness and truth. The woman who was now part of his life was not a replacement, nor a consolation. She was a whole person, who arrived when he no longer carried shards in his hands. She didn't heal wounds, she respected the time he took to heal them. With her, he rediscovered the pleasure of sharing daily life without fear, without unnecessary burdens, without the constant feeling of trying to hold on to something that had already slipped away. John began to revive small projects that had been shelved for years. A photography course, guitar lessons, sunrise walks. Each activity seemed like a metaphor for rebirth. His house, once filled with uncomfortable silences, now pulsed with spontaneous laughter, the aromas of coffee made together, and conversations that lasted until dawn. He rediscovered himself not as someone who had been betrayed, but as someone who chose not to forever carry the burden of a pain that no longer belonged to him. There was, within him, a peace that only those who have survived the deepest disappointment are capable of feeling. It was no longer a matter of forgetting what had happened. It was a matter of not allowing that to define who he would be from then on. On the other side, Emily was slowly sinking into a reality built by her own choices. The loss of John was a constant echo in the corners of the house which, even after being redecorated, still bore the marks of his presence. Every space brought back memories of a time that would never return, and the days seemed to drag on amidst frustrated attempts to fill a void that no one else could occupy. She went out a few times, tried to distract herself with new encounters, shallow conversations, and rehearsed smiles, but nothing seemed real. The looks she received didn't touch her, the hugs seemed cold, the words of others didn't go beyond the surface. She had lost something that, now, she understood had been rare, a calm, solid, patient love. A love that didn't shout, but sustained. That wasn't perfect, but was safe. Her friends tried to cheer her up, telling her she was young, that life goes on, that everyone makes mistakes. But none of those phrases could erase the memory of John's gaze when he said, "I forgive you, but I'm not coming back." That look returned in her dreams, in her daydreams, in her moments of greatest loneliness. And the cruelest thing was knowing that he had moved on. That he was now smiling with someone who wasn't her. That he was now giving to another what, at some point, had been his. And that gnawed at her from the inside in a silent and constant way, like water that seeps in unnoticed and one day brings down the entire structure. When she tried to contact him again, a few weeks later, her message went unanswered. Not out of malice. But because, this time, John no longer felt any need to open doors that were already locked from the inside. Mark, the man she had fallen for at the dance, continued his life as always, light, superficial, fleeting. That rejection Emily suffered from him, the refused kiss, the cold phrase, the contempt disguised as sincerity, was the final blow that brought her back to reality. He never wanted a future with her. He desired her for a moment and discarded her like turning any old page. And that's what she became, a turned page in the life of a man who never intended to write any story. Emily started attending an emotional support group. Not out of obligation, but because she could no longer cope alone with the guilt and the feeling of having destroyed what was most beautiful in her life. There, she didn't talk much. She just listened. Observed. And tried, as much as possible, to understand exactly where she began to lose herself even before losing John. A few months later, John was invited to an end-of-year gathering organized by a couple of friends. It was the same group they used to hang out with when they were still together. At first, he hesitated. But he was encouraged by his partner, who was now walking alongside him. She wasn't jealous of the past, she understood him. And that motivated him to go. At the event, he found familiar faces, sincere hugs, and an almost nostalgic feeling of a new beginning. He talked, laughed, shared stories. And when Emily arrived later, there was a moment of silence. Their eyes met. And there she was, different, more reserved, thinner, perhaps more mature, but visibly downcast. She approached slowly. The friends respectfully stepped back. And for a few seconds, they stood face to face like strangers who had once loved each other deeply. Emily tried to smile. He did too. She said she was happy to see him doing well. He replied that he hoped she was finding herself too. And she, with tears in her eyes, simply said that she was trying. There was no tension. There was no hurt. Just a silent acceptance that this, right there, was the definitive end. Not a tragic end, but a necessary end. Because some loves, even true ones, don't survive certain decisions. John left the party with his new partner, hand in hand, with calm steps. In the car, she asked if he was all right. And he replied with a sincere smile that he couldn't remember the last time he felt so at peace. That night marked for him not only a closure, but a rebirth. He had managed to get through the pain without letting it turn him into someone bitter. He had been betrayed, yes. But now he was free. And as for Emily, she went home alone that night. She sat on the sofa, put on some soft music, and looked at the forgotten coffee cup on the table. It was cold. Everything was. But for the first time, she didn't try to justify herself. She just felt. She felt the emptiness of a bad choice. She felt the absence of something she would never have again. And finally, she understood what she had lost. It wasn't just John. It was the best of herself. If you've made it this far, you've surely felt the impact of each decision made by these characters. Now, we want to know, what did you think of this story? Comment below with your opinion. What would you have done in their place? Have you ever experienced something similar, or do you know someone who has? Your participation is very important to us. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more stories like this. True stories that show the depth of human emotions, the effects of choices, and the consequences of actions that sometimes seem small but destroy everything. And remember, betrayal is never the answer. This channel does not support or romanticize any kind of betrayal. Our goal is to show that fidelity, respect, and truth are still the pillars of any relationship that wants to survive the test of time. Betrayal doesn't just destroy the other person, it destroys the one who commits it, corrodes what was painstakingly built, and slowly kills trust, love, and admiration. A wrong choice in a moment can cost a lifetime of regret. Think carefully before crossing lines that can never be erased. Until the next story.